Waar ligt de grens tussen waarheid en fictie? Zijn verhalen sowieso gelogen? En wat betekent waarheid in een wereld waarin alles kan? De studenten redactievaardigheden aan de KU Leuven zoeken dat voor jullie uit.
Episode 4, Shock Documentaries.
Hey, I'm Laura.
Hi, I'm Morgan.
In this episode, we'll dive deep into shock effects and storytelling techniques used in documentaries, so that at the end of this podcast episode, you'll be a more critical Netflix watcher. So what is a shock documentary exactly?
Well, a shock doc is a documentary that makes use of a variety of shocking facts, figures, or images to get its point across to viewers. In other words, a shock doc is a documentary that contains a lot of storytelling, more so than a regular documentary. Storytelling techniques are what is used to narrate a story in a way that captivates an audience. They can consist of all sorts of tips and tricks. Cliffhanger moments, suspenseful music, the specific way of framing certain scenes, the use of uncomfortable images or large percentages. You name it, documentary makers can use it. But do these effects always land the way the makers want them to? Or is the audience perhaps more perceptive than we give them credit for? For this episode, we'll have a look at What the Health, and we asked some friends of ours to watch the documentary and send us their thoughts, so you'll get to hear some of their actual reactions.
Let's start by recapping What the Health.
What the Health is an American-made documentary from 2017 that is readily available on Netflix. It's all about diet and very clearly advocates for a vegan diet because it argues that there is a link between animal and dairy products and diseases such as cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. This documentary vehemently criticizes the general and official approach to dietary requirements, by which we mean that it speaks out against what the United States government and the big health organizations are advertising as a healthy meal plan, because these meal plans are actively misleading the general public, according to the maker's sources. What the Health uses real names of real organizations, the huge main ones that the public is meant to trust, like the American Diabetes Association or the American Heart Association, and shows the viewer what kind of companies sponsor them, namely the big food corporations that make the products the studies show are so detrimental to our health. The documentary is made up of interviews with doctors and experts who advocate for a plant-based diet and explain why eating animal products is so unhealthy. It also includes testimonies of people with chronic diseases and ends with a series of clips of those people, and a number of gym rats, whose lives changed when they switched to a plant-based diet.
Our question is, how much of that is storytelling and how do viewers actually react to those kind of techniques?
What in particular is the correlation with the diet and diabetes?
I'm not going to get into that.
Into diet?
No.
What you just heard is one of the techniques used in a shock doc, a moment of tension embellished with a suspenseful sound effect. There are so many other techniques used to impress or astonish the viewer, but here are some just so you get the idea.
Shocking images.
Like a mom making dinner for her kids, but instead of meat, there are cigarettes in the pan.
Shocking comparisons.
The amount of people who die from cardiovascular disease is the equivalent of 4 jumbo jets crashing every single hour, every single day, every single year.
Serving chicken at a diabetes event is like serving alcohol at an AA meeting. It just doesn't make sense.
Shocking statistics.
18% by 51%.
But also letting doctors and experts do the talking in order to increase credibility because they're supposed to be the ones who know the truth.
But what is the truth?
We interviewed a documentary maker, Nick Baltazar, who had some interesting insights on the subject. Namely, the truth is always multifaceted, but in a documentary, only one perspective is chosen and demonstrated. As a filmmaker, you cannot mention it all, so you have to choose a certain point of view. That doesn't mean it isn't the truth, it just means it's not the whole truth. We also asked him about the effects of some of the shocking footage used in documentaries. He explained that people often don't believe that the most shocking footage is real. They hope it isn't, and as a result, come up with all kinds of reasons why it can't be real.
So how do people actually react?
Here's what our first viewer had to say.
I think the documentary touched on a lot of good points about how nutrition is currently fucked in our society, in the sense of that people don't know what is good for them and what isn't good for them. However, I did also think that it went into almost a propaganda or conspiracy theory kind of direction, and that made it hard for me to really believe any of it. I will definitely be doing some of my own research to see what all these things, how true they are, and whether or not any of it can be believed. But just based on some of the things they said quite at the beginning of the documentary about diabetes and causes of it, I'm not sure I can really stand behind anything they said. And because of the fact that it started so badly, I kind of thought that the rest of it became less credible. Though that doesn't mean that all of it is obviously a lie, but it just didn't give me the full confidence in their data or anything like that. And I know that they sourced some pretty good, I guess, papers and some good sources overall, like Harvard, but it still didn't really sink in with me, and I'm not sure that I trust the documentary in any way, shape, or form.
So, as the filmmaker predicted, the initial reaction is mistrust.
But is that because of what is said or how it is said?
If I could use one word to describe what the health would be, sensational.
The general consensus of the people we polled was that the presentation of the facts made the documentary feel untrustworthy. Everything felt a little too coincidental. Viewers seemed really bothered by the fact that the narrator doesn't ever name his peer-reviewed studies or indicate where he sourced them. The most common reactions also included noticing the one-sidedness of the narrative.
It typically only showed interviews from doctors that were agreeing with this plant-based narrative. They should have sought after different medical professionals, different interviewees, in order to have a balanced argument in this documentary.
The documentary lacked nuance. For instance, the doctors advise taking supplements for the vitamins we can't get from plants, but they don't mention any of the possible side effects or health risks of taking or mixing a bunch of unregulated supplements. On our end, we consulted a dietitian who was schooled in traditional nutrition, and her main concern was that eating habits need to be paired with physical exercise, and that any decision to switch to a plant-based diet needs to be facilitated by a nutritionist in order to make sure you consume the right amount and variety of substitutes and don't rack up any deficits.
So what's the main takeaway from all of this?
When you watch a documentary about something that affects your habits, make sure to stay critical about the information you are given. Remember that the final product you're watching is only meant to be food for thought, because it's only one side of the story. It never hurts to do some research yourself. The emotions you're experiencing are created. That's the power of storytelling, and there's always more to the truth.